Go for it.
Okay. Thanks everybody for having me. I'm Mark Prince, coming here from Colorado State University. And I'm going to be talking about the state of the science of cannabis research, assessment issues and methods. And this is more of a storytelling of the work that I've done with my colleagues at CSU. And this doesn't work. All right, I'll do it this way. I also do a lot of indigenous research, so I just want to take 1 minute to acknowledge our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples, and also the other indigenous people from the land USC occupies around Southern California, and pay respect to their past and present. Okay, so just a little bit of background on me. I got my PhD in 2014, and my graduate training primarily focused on alcohol research. I worked with Sandy Brown, Kate Carey, Steve Maisto, all primarily alcohol researchers. And then I did a postdoc at the Research Institute on Addictions, where I worked with Lorraine Collins, and that's where I began studying cannabis. In 2012, Colorado legalized recreational cannabis, and the dispensaries opened in 2014, and I began at CSU in 2016. So right as like everything sort of got into place and was functioning normally. During my talk today, I'm going to run through 4 studies that focus on our work on cannabis quantity, potency, automatic real-time data collection, and an enhanced self-reporting measures of modified timeline follow-back, just as a little overview of the topics. So this story begins when, right when I got to CSU. So I got there in the fall of 2016, and in the spring of 2017, my friend and colleague Brad Connor and I got a small grant from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to look at data from before and after the implementation of recreational marijuana in Colorado. And from the outset, the project seemed relatively straightforward. Our first aim was focused on understanding cannabis use in vulnerable populations like adolescent initiation of cannabis use and cannabis use among the LGBTQ+ population. We also wanted to define occasional and heavy use and look at predictors of those, the effects of use patterns on health, and then look at self-reported cannabis potency and the impact of potency on development of cannabis use disorders. So it seemed like a pretty straightforward, small state-level study. But when we got into it, the first thing we realized was we really couldn't look at cannabis use in vulnerable populations before we did aims 2 and 3. And when we started thinking about occasional versus heavy use, we had to ask ourselves, what is occasional use? Does it only involve cannabis use frequency? What's heavy use? Is that only quantity? How does potency play into this? And then predicting health, well, what about medical use? How do we predict for recreational users versus medical users? So all of these questions we were faced with. Similarly with potency, at that time in 2016, we didn't even know what the ranges of potency were in the legal market. Also, when we think about potency, is this only THC? What about CBD or other cannabinoids? And what about routes of administration? We knew about flower and edibles, but concentrates were relatively new, topicals, all sorts of things. And so in 2016, nearly all studies examined 30-day frequency of cannabis use as the primary outcome. Concentrated cannabis products were new. We didn't know a ton about them. And one thing we did know is that the potency of the flower was increasing, and also that legal market cannabis flower looked really different than what you could buy at the dispensaries. Also, there were lots of regulations and barriers to observational research in 2016. For example, CSU is a land grant institution, so it's federal land, so we couldn't bring legal market cannabis into the lab. We couldn't touch or handle the cannabis products. We couldn't ask people to use it. And we were even limited in broad survey research because at that point, we didn't even know what questions to ask. So this was like the starting point as we tried to do this, this first small state-funded project. So our first step was to get into the communities, and dispensaries seemed like a good place to go. We met with a lot of bud tenders, and they had tons of recommendations. If you have pain, you should use this. If you have sleep problems, you should use that. But their recommendations weren't based in science. The other thing we quickly learned was that the bud tenders didn't have the authority to let us post flyers or recruit participants. And similarly, the managers of the dispensaries were hard to reach. They're busy trying to run a shop and were mostly too busy to sit down with us. Some of them were, and in general, everyone we talked to in the cannabis industry was super excited to do research. But what we found is even when we got managers that were willing to let us post flyers, stand outside and recruit, it was small samples. The participants from the dispensaries weren't great at completing our surveys or following through with research. They were there to buy cannabis. They weren't there to participate in research. And so it wasn't the best place to get connected to the community. The next thing we learned that was a huge game changer for us was the existence of cannabis social clubs. And I actually looked, there are some here in LA. And this is an image here of Cultivated Synergy, which is a place we did a lot of this research I'll be presenting on today. And they had, so during the day, it was a shared business space. And then in the evening, they had private events like Bend and Blaze Yoga, Huff and Puff, where you do dabs and exercise. They had Dab and Dine, where they brought in professional chefs to match the terpenes and the cannabis projects with food, bud tender appreciation nights, product releases. They had marketing folks there. And so this was a place where we could come and connect with people throughout the cannabis industry. And they were happy to talk to us. They were happy to participate in our research. And it totally changed for us the work we were able to do. Again, I'm not sure exactly how much everyone in the audience knows, so I'm going to take a couple minutes to go through some of the basics. Cannabis comes in many forms and the potency varies a lot. Recreational cannabis is different than cannabis you can buy from NIDA. NIDA has cannabis from one grow facility, and it's typically much lower potency than what's on the legal recreational market. I'll be talking about terms, and these are cannabis outcomes in research that we may be predicting. So frequency would be how often a substance was used, quantity, how much of the substance was used. Potency is the amount of the psychoactive compound in the product, and there are over 100 known cannabinoids. We primarily, when you think about cannabis, mostly we're talking about THC delta 9 or sometimes CBD, but there's lots of other ones that are interesting. And then when we think about a dose of cannabis, that's usually operationalized as quantity times potency. Cannabis flower, so this is the plant matter itself. The potency typically ranges from 15 to 30% THC and about 0 to 10% CBD in the recreational market. Concentrated cannabis products, which take a lot of different forms, are much higher potency, typically 40 to 90%. I've seen higher than 90% THC. Some also have some CBD in them. Edibles, recreational doses are typically sold in 10 milligrams of CBD, again, or of THC. Some also have CBD in them. Medical doses tend to range from 5 to 100 milligrams of THC. There are also topical solutions that are usually balanced THC to CBD with about 2.5 milligrams of each per dose. Some are CBD only. One of our colleagues, Marcel Bondmiller, has done some work on topicals, and there's no local receptors, and they have to use like an accelerant actually to get it through the skin. And so topicals are really just expensive lotion. I also want to just take a minute to juxtapose lab and field studies. So lab studies are tightly controlled. We know how much people are using, the frequency, the potency. They have very high internal validity. We can control a lot of the factors. but low external validity, and that the use doesn't look like it looks in the real world. Field or observational studies, we have little or no control over quantity, frequency, or potency, but it has high external validity, where people are using in their homes, out in the world the way they normally will, and we trade off for low internal validity. Okay, so like I said, in 2016, at this point, most research was just looking at 30-day frequency, and we felt it was important to understand cannabis quantity. And so we designed a study to look at the relative accuracy of estimations of quantities of cannabis. We wanted to define like what was a typical dose across preparations for joints, bowls, concentrates. Were there predictors of the quantity people prepared? And were there any predictors of their accuracy in estimation? So were more experienced users better able to estimate quantities? We collected data at two types of events held at Cultivated Synergy and that Cannabis Social Club. We had large industry-related product demonstration workforce appreciation events. So imagine like a warehouse with like booths set up all the way around, and people were demoing new products or giving away things to the bud tenders. And then we had a booth where people would come and participate in our task, and they could win a raffle. And then we had 6 non-industry social events, yoga classes, happy hours. We had one specialized research event. And so what we did was we asked people to either roll a joint or pack a bowl with cannabis they provided and load a dab if they used cannabis, and then place the joint or bowl or the dab tool on the scale, and we blocked it so they couldn't see, and then guess how much it weighed. Then the researcher recorded the true weight of each preparation. And so here's a little bit of demographic information. So it's, decently even split between industry and non-industry events. And this is actually an important thing, because if you're a bud tender that weighs out products all day long, you would think that would be different than a typical person who just uses cannabis. Primarily non-Hispanic white male sample, and some of that is the location and people who were members of the social club. A small little side note here. We assessed recreational and medical, but the majority of people that endorsed medical also used recreationally. So there were very few pure medical users. On average, the participants were 30 years old and had started using cannabis around age 15. So here on this table, we have, this is combined across both flower preparations, flower packed in a bowl, flower rolled in a joint, and concentrates. This was the actual weight on the scale, and this is the weight they estimated. This is the difference. Here's a Cohen's d effect size. So these are all pretty large effects. And overall, if you just look at the percentiles, everyone consistently overestimated like between 130 and 213%. So everyone overestimated, even the bud tenders. Like I said, we were kind of surprised by this. For bowls, the average overestimation was 168%, for joints 137%, for concentrates 213%. And so the first thing to notice here is that overestimation was proportional to the quantity prepared. So if you loaded 1/10 of a gram on a dab tool, you would maybe guess 2/10, but if you rolled a 1/2 gram joint, you might guess 0.7, right? So everyone was overestimating, but it was proportional to the amount they prepared. And that was important because it showed that people misestimated in a systematic way where they rank ordered themselves. And so this is useful for statistics because most of our statistical methods require people to rank order themselves, so which is something that we can't do with frequency data. You can have lots of people that use, the same number of days, but we don't know how much they used on a given day. And so like the take home message is those who packed, rolled, or loaded more also estimated more. We were also able to get some kind of standard sizes. So the typical joint here was about a 1/2 gram. bowl was about 1/4 gram, and concentrate was about 1/10 of a gram. So this is helpful just to like get us in the ballpark for estimates of how much people are using in these different preparations. We were shocked that this was not better among industry workers. You would think if this was your job all day that you would get the hang of this, but practice doesn't make perfect. Although at the bud tender appreciation event, we had one guy who was a chemist that asked us, how many decimal places do you want? And we told him our scale went to 3 and he got it perfect. So if you're a chemist, you can maybe do it, but not for regular people. Okay, so a couple lessons learned. So one thing, so we couldn't provide any of the products, but we had at our stand like rolling papers, bowls, dabs tools that were the same. And we noticed that, that obviously put an upper limit on how much someone could prepare. And that's why like those standard sizes were really probably only pulled for the sizes of the things that we had. Another thing that you never hear talked about, but actually makes a big difference, is how finely the flour was broken up influenced the amount prepared. So we had a grinder. We didn't tell them anything about it, but people who just like broke it up with their fingers versus someone who ground it into a powder could fit like much more of the product into the same thing. And so as researchers, if we're really interested in quantity, this is a kind of a lurking variable people don't talk about. It's just like how finely it's broken up. The other thing that we learned, so before they participated or after, depending on the event, they did a little survey, and people reported pretty complex like how they use patterns throughout the day. It wasn't like they just used one product one time a day. People might report using concentrates in the morning, flour at night, edibles during the day. And, a lot of times our surveys and assessment tools don't capture the amount of nuance that participants are actually using. One not published study that we did, sorry, can I go back? This is different than my computer. Come on. Shoot, it's not letting me go back, but I'm not going to click anymore. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. So we did, the arrows aren't working. Oh, there it goes. It wasn't working before. So we did one other study. We didn't publish this, where we had 3 tables set up. One where it's just the task is normal. One where we had pictures of cannabis, like if you've all done research with like standard drinks of alcohol or cannabis, where you have like a joint next to a dollar bill or something next to a quarter. And then we had another table where there were actual piles that were weighed out and had people perform the task, and there was no differences. So these cues didn't improve estimation, but it was a pretty small sample. And I think we probably need to collect a little more data before we say that's definitive. Okay, so that was our working, main study in quantity. Moving on to potency, there's, especially, we were doing this work before COVID, and there's a lot of concern, I think it still exists, about are these higher potency products associated with poorer physical and mental health problems? And so we start to look at this, to look at the links between potency and physical and mental health. And the first thing, so this is the quality here isn't very good. It's not super important. The main thing is, so we had people fill out a checklist like you might get at a doctor's office, and at an intake with a list of physical and mental health problems. And then we looked at the association between the potency of the cannabis they were using and their endorsement of any of these physical and mental health symptoms. And we just looked at correlations. So this gray line here shows the overall correlation, which is all pretty much small to trivial when collapsed across products. When we broke it up into just flour, we saw a little bit more consistent trends with some more negative correlations for some problems. And this animated for concentrates, we saw more consistent positive associations. Some of them were slightly higher than others. But the main thing here is that the findings were really inconsistent. And there were some positive, some negative, some trivial associations across the domains. And ultimately, our data didn't give strong support that higher potency was associated with more endorsement of negative outcomes. It's also cross-sectional, so we don't know if people who had these problems were choosing these products, or if the products were causing them. We can't infer any of those things, but it did bring up some measurement issues. And the most striking was the importance of method of administration. And so there's an inherent bimodality of a combined potency variable with clusters of potency for flower around 20% and concentrates around 76%. So, oh, it looks like something, I don't know what happened there. So this histogram here is just the potency data. And so you can see, even without me telling you, here's all the flower, here's all the concentrates. And so if you put this in a correlation or regression, it strongly violates the normality assumption, and ultimately obscures a lot of the effects. And so it's important, if you're doing potency research, that you look at it by product, not overall. And part of it, although actually recently in Colorado, there have been some products in this range, but in 2016, 2017, 2018, if you were going to buy concentrates, you didn't want mid-quality, potency concentrates, or else people would just smoke flower in general. But we're seeing, I think, the same way that every time you drink, you don't want moonshine. We're starting to see these mid-tier 1-to-1 products coming onto the market. Oh, there's my thing. So yeah, the take-home message here is that collapsing across potency across flower and concentrated cannabis products obscured the important relations. And when analyzed separately, the findings were more consistent. I wouldn't hang my hat on any one of those in particular findings. This is more about the assessment tool and statistical methods I want to highlight here. In the combined data, I feel like I already said this, most of the effects were trivial. When separated, we saw two patterns, with flower being primarily showing negative associations and concentrates primarily showing positive associations. And again, it's hard to know what this means. Among those using concentrated cannabis products, the ones that chose higher potency concentrates were more likely to endorse some physical mental health problems. I hesitate to make too much of it, but I do think the methods are important. Okay. The next study I want to talk about is about automatic real-time data collection. And so this came from, I don't want to get ahead of myself. So ecological momentary assessment is kind of state of the science, where you're having people fill out surveys multiple times a day on their phone, which is great. You're getting near real-time data collection, but ultimately it's still self-report. And we know that people can't report quantity super accurately. Many times they don't know the potency of their product. So even though EMA is great, I use EMA and recommend it to people, there are some limitations that we might be able to overcome. Where automatic real-time data collection is a good balance of these lab and observational studies, where if you have a device that can automatically collect the cannabis use information, we can maximize both internal and external validity, where participants purchase their own product and use it as they typically would and passively collect the data. And so at one of these events at Cultivated Synergy, we met this guy, Wes Donahoe, who is a marketing graduate student and was working for a company called GoFire. This is his marketing company, the Ninth Block. It didn't exist at that time, but Wes is great and has continued to connect us to people. Would definitely put a shout out in for him as someone to reach out to. And he told us about this smart Bluetooth enabled vaporizer. And so it was a company called GoFire, and it was a device that was paired with an app. And what's nice about it is it automatically collected frequency, quantity, potency, It was a standardized route of administration, and there was no need for self-report. The device delivered metered doses of cannabis with a known chemical profile that was tracked in a database and linked to an app. So basically, as the cartridges were loaded, they were tested and stamped with a microchip that the device read. So it knew exactly, not just the THC, CBD, CBN, CBG, all of this stuff. And each click of the device extruded 2.5 milligrams. And then I think I have some pictures. And also there were surveys linked to it so people could say why they were using, anxiety, sleep, pain, and then they could say how effective the product was for the reason they selected. So this is what it looks like. This is the cartridge that goes into this device. In this device, it extrudes. I have a bad glare, but this is actually kind of upside down. This is the mouthpiece up here. And here's a wheel that you would click to extrude the concentrate, and then it would vaporize it and you would inhale it. The app, like I said, is very intuitive, well-designed software. These are just, I realize you all can see this too. So these are some of the things that they had embedded in their app. This is all from their marketing stuff, but it had a map so you could find what dispensaries sold the cartridges. They had community ratings of like how helpful is this particular product for a number of different reasons people might use. You could click if it was a solo session, which is great for researchers because it tells you like, did I use this myself or did I take half and give half to my friend? And then it also had this really cool tracking. So you could look at like times a day people used. This feature over here was really helpful too. So there was this diamond, and as you inhale, the like bars go around the side, and then when it like highlights in the middle, it shows you that you got the entire dose. And so like in a way encourage people to take as much as they like extruded. You could also set the temperature, which like for connoisseurs really apparently affects like the taste and things. And probably research needs to be done too on the temperature for combustion. Lots of great things. I can share these slides. Their website is still up, but I'll tell more about their story in a minute. So ultimately, I'm going to talk a little bit about some preliminary data from a pilot study with 17 participants who regularly use cannabis, where we had them complete 3 weeks of data collection. And they were all participating in the beta trial. So we met with these folks just as they were getting ready to go to market, and they let us collect data as part of their beta trial. And so we got to give them a baseline survey. We paid them $20, and then they got a free device from GoFire for being in their beta. The participants were able to purchase cartridges from established dispensaries. And these were vertically integrated companies, which means the same place grows the product, harvests it, produces the concentrates, ships it to dispensaries. And basically participants were just instructed to use the devices they normally would. So at that time, there were actually 4 cartridges, one that was primarily CBD, one primarily THC, one that was a mix, and they could get whatever kinds they buy, whatever ones they wanted, and use them however they wanted. Every time they used the device, it automatically uploaded the data to the secure server. And 20 minutes after they used the device, they had to complete a brief survey that said whether it was a solo session, why they used, and how effective it was. So here's a breakdown of the participants. So slightly older than our previous studies, average age of about 40, about 50% female, mostly white, non-Hispanic, mostly employed, kind of higher income. About half worked in the cannabis industry, and they were all Colorado residents. The participants on average started using cannabis around age 17. Had used cannabis about 23 days in the last month. But kind of a mix, rec only and rec and medical use. All of them had used flower in the past. 3/4 had used concentrates in the past, and 88% had used edibles in the past. So fairly experienced users. So across 3 weeks, the devices recorded 116 use episodes. The vast majority were solo sessions. On average, people use the device about 7 times, so about 3 times a week. And we do have data that they were using other cannabis products in addition to the device, which we didn't tell them not to or have any control over, but we didn't analyze it. There's like very detailed timestamps. You could actually look at like, really fine grained use patterns if you wanted to. In general, so here's some of the data collected. The average was about 8 milligrams per dose that they chose, with like these amounts of CBG, CBN, CBC, CBD, THC, and some ranges over here. So for potency, this is aggregated across the 4 products. But I'll show you some. So this is some output from their app, which is really helpful. So this was output for the super sour lemon. Can I minimize it? Sorry. It just feels like it's constantly in my way. Come on. Sorry. So here's like some of the top reasons people reported using this one, their intended use, and then average ratings, and then the breakdown of the potency for this particular strain. Here's the time of day that people use this super sour lemon, so kind of trended towards later in the afternoon, evening. And then the effectiveness rating by dose size, again, it's kind of interesting that it's almost flat, in that like a higher dose didn't lead to higher effectiveness ratings, which is, I think, kind of interesting. Here's a 50% THC product. Here, the people were selecting this kind of more, looks like around dinner time, and kind of similar, not a ton of like consistent trends that we can see with higher ratings. If anything, maybe a little bit lower for the highest doses. And then here's a 60% CBD cartridge. And people tend to use this kind of throughout the day, maybe kind of a few discrete periods. And again, kind of flat, how much they use didn't change their rating of the product. And so again, more than anything, what I want to demonstrate here is just like how much data there is that you could get from a device such as this. So a product like this has great potential to collect big data that's well suited for predictive analytics. However, right now, GoFire is not on the market. Unfortunately, like in COVID-19 was a perfect storm for GoFire. It like hit right as they were going on the market. All their manufacturing was happening in China and like stopped production. Also, Cultivated Synergy closed down. And so that was really tough. Like all of this research, if you look at the publication dates for pre-COVID, all of this research basically ground to a halt. And so what we had to do was pivot to doing more survey research and design a new measure and make some new connections during this time. And so one of the things that we worked on was a revised timeline follow-back measure. And we made connections with a vertically integrated cannabis company called Seed & Smith. They grow, harvest, make concentrates, edibles, topicals, distribute, and sell. And we learned a ton meeting with them. So these are business people. The owners like rarely, if ever, use cannabis. They are like on cutting edge product development. They have PhD chemists on staff. They were super interested in research, really happy to work with us. We're like, if we wanted to do a study where we wanted, high potency, low potency, placebo, mix, like they would make it to us, sell it to participants for a penny. We're just so easy to work with. And like, these were the right people for researchers to get in the room with, because they had all the connections. They, they were selling the product. They still are selling products to dispensaries all over the state, and know the people like these are the right folks. And we've started to do some mobile van studies with Seed and Smith. It was interesting to hear the things that they're interested in. So they're very interested in terpenes and minor cannabinoids, and also fast and long acting edibles. They also have a lot of knowledge that should be published. Like, for example, there's like no such thing as indica and sativa anymore. Like there was at one time 2 separate species of plants, indica and sativa, but they've all been so crossbred, and there's no botanist like testing these, that like that's all marketing scam. And like we got to go like tour the facility and go in like the room. It's like a perpetual spring in there where they have all the mother plants that they take the clones from or the cuttings from, and like they're all just like some random mix of indica and sativa that no one knows. So like anytime, like this should be in the world, right? But it's just interesting to talk to them, hear the things they're focused on, and they're great partners, and these are the partnerships we're building moving forward. So I want to show, we'll see if I can do this. Stop share. I want to show a quick demo of this timeline follow back that we've built. So again, now that we're trying to do more survey research as Cultivated Synergies has closed down, we've also, one of my colleagues' house, Carolee, got a mobile lab, and we're going to people's houses. So we're, but this is a great survey tool we've built. So here.
Sorry, can you share that screen? Because the people on the online can't see it.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
If you share your browser screen.
Let me try it one more time.
The Google screen.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay. George had said to share the whole thing. Can they see that now?
Yeah.
Okay. So if you hover over these, I don't know how well you can see it, but it gives a little description of what each of these types are. And so let's say, so this is, you could set this to any number of days. And we've had people tell us like how far back they think they could estimate, but this is just a demo for 3 days. So if I click all of them, so if I start the survey, of course, it's going to take a second on here. The first thing is we have a lot of check boxes so they can quickly move through it. So we've had people do 30-day reports on here, and they're done in about 5 minutes. So let's say I didn't use cannabis yesterday. And we also have an alcohol and cannabis version that has boxes for this. But then on Monday, maybe I know between 12 p.m. and 6 p.m. And so here I can say, what did I use? I can uncheck these. Let's say I only used flour. You can see them disappear. And then in flour, it gives us the pictures. And then I can say I use, say, a half a gram, and it was 20% THC and 0% CBD. And then, later in the evening, maybe I didn't use flour, but I used the other ones. I can go into edible. And someone gave me an edible I know I used, but I don't know how much THC it was. I don't know how much CBD it was. In concentrates, I used, say, 1/10 of a gram at 90% THC, 0% CBD. Topical, I had 2.5 milligrams of THC, 2.5 milligrams of CBD. And then I also had, I don't know, some eye drops. And I don't know how much they had in them. Somebody gave them to me. Right. And then I didn't use cannabis here. I didn't use cannabis here. And then I also didn't use on Sunday, and that completes it. So it's like a great way where we can get quantity, frequency, potency, route of administration, and reduces participant burden because they can move around through this timeline in a relatively quick way. All right, so now I'm going to try to unshare and go back to my slides and reshare. Okay. Hmm. And so far we've run this a few different semesters at CSU, in the college student sample. We pilot tested at William and Mary and a couple other places. And the nice thing here is like the utility of a tool like this is that the range of possible variables is just immense, like quantity, frequency, potency, route of administration, and so forth. The formatting got a little messed up, but for example, you can easily calculate things like the percent of time using cannabis flower, concentrates, or edibles, the typical potency of the products, the typical quantity consumed, the maximum quantity consumed, the typical cannabis dose, percent days abstinent. And so in this little demo I'm going to show is just some correlations across these different metrics with the Cannabis Problems Questionnaire, which was developed by Jan Copeland. It's just a list of yes or no problems. It's highly reliable and assesses a range of cannabis consequences. Typically, here I'm going to use a total score, although there are some latent factors. For the data here, we have people reported about 67% of the use they reported was flower, 32% concentrates, 38% edibles, 11% oils or topicals, and 6% other. The typical potency people reported was 20% for flower and 70% for concentrates. This is THC, and for CBD, 8% for flower and 9% for concentrates. Okay, again, this is really hard to read, but the main thing here, all across the x-axis are all different types of aggregates you can get out of this modified timeline follow back. In the beginning here, we have proportion of days using, proportion of days abstinent, right? So those seem to be big, bigger correlations with consequences. Also tells us that frequency is probably a decent metric if you're interested in 30-day consequences. Percent time using flower, and you can see they kind of go up and down, ebb and flow, and this would be something where you could really select based on your research question what metric you were most interested in. We saw the strongest associations with consequences were with percent time using flower, percent days using or abstinent, the potency of edibles, the potency of topicals and other products, max quantity of flower and concentrate, and the dose of THC and CBD, and not dose for flower. So this was kind of interesting. So again, this is just some pilot data to show the utility of the tool. Okay, so we're in the home stretch. Some lessons learned from these studies. One, people can't estimate quantity, but they do rank order themselves. So it's still useful to collect quantity information. Potency does not clearly produce risk, but there's likely some lurking variables. I think we need a lot of research on tolerance, self-regulation, titration, other things. Automatic real-time data collection has a lot of promise, but at this point, I don't know of any device that's working similarly to what GoFire was doing, but be on the lookout for it. And then the other thing is that cannabis use can be defined in a lot of ways. And so when we think about cannabis use or cannabis research, we need to be a lot more nuanced than that, thinking about what are we most interested in, what are most related to our outcomes. Dose is very complicated, right? It's quantity times potency, but you also have route of administration and all these things. Alan Budney, that I heard was here recently, has developed a constant to adjust for the psychopharmacological effects of route of administration. So if you think about, the same quantity, if you take quantity times potency and you have flower, like a vape, a dab, an edible, like even the same dose affects you differently because of the psychopharmacological effects of the way it's ingested. And so he's developed this constant to adjust for those. And I think that, that's really exciting research on the horizon. The other thing we learned from industry, although I haven't seen this published, but like kind of things to be on the lookout for. So there's THC Delta 8, which isn't regulated like Delta 9. It can be sold in states without recreational cannabis alongside CBD. It has some like psychotropic effects, but people are reporting pretty like unpleasant experiences from it. CBN seems to have good sleep properties, and so you're starting to see in edibles designed for sleep more CBN included. And also there's just this vast array of other cannabinoids that have gotten very little research. I think we need to define a cannabis binge, like a huge, in my mind, the biggest question in the cannabis field right now is what is problematic cannabis use? You can't say it's using every day because for medical, someone using medically, like that might be what's indicated. You can't say it's high potency or high quantity. Like we don't know what is problematic cannabis use. We're identifying a binge threshold, or like the point at which the likelihood you're going to experience a negative outcome increases, is probably an important tool that, at least in the alcohol field, has helped a lot. Like I said, we need to define and understand problem use, and we need lab studies with legal market products. You know, there's so many things that could be done in a lab that are hard to replicate, even in the best, most thoughtful observational studies, that we need more lab studies. You know, my recommendations to all of you are make connections with folks at cannabis social clubs, cannabis marketing folks, vertically integrated cannabis companies. Like these people are excited. They want to see good quality cannabis research. They want to legitimize the work they're doing. They want, you know, good scientists that are like-minded out there. The frontline dispensaries, bud tenders tend not to have the keys to the castle. For the survey data, the timeline follow back that we're developing has a lot of potential, but even without, you know, if you want to use that, let me know. Otherwise, like just think about it. There's a lot more to this than just quantity, frequency, potency. You can have a lot more nuance, and depending on your research question, like any of those, like more specific outcomes, percent days abstinent, things like that, might be more relevant to the work that you're doing. You know, automatic real-time data collection has promise, but in the absence of that, ecological momentary assessment is great, and you know, brings the survey rate to people, minimizes retrospective bias, and has a lot of potential. And these like intensive longitudinal designs have a lot of promise. And then regarding to potency, it's complicated, and we've been surprised. Every time we've looked at it, we've been surprised. And I think there's a lot of lurking variables out there. The way people's tolerance, the way they titrate, you know, you talk to medical professionals, they think we're turning cannabis into crack. You talk to regular people using, and they say, well, I'd much rather use 1/10 of a gram of concentrates than 1/2 gram of flour. It's like got to be better for my lungs. And like, there's a lot of open questions that we just don't know yet. Personally, I feel that consequences are poorly understood. A lot of our consequences measures were adapted from alcohol and don't totally translate. Cannabis use disorder is really focused on like what we used to call dependence, withdrawal, craving, tolerance, which are important. But usually these aren't the things that people are trying to avoid. They're trying to avoid the quality of their work, suffering, relationship problems, financial problems. And a lot of our measures just don't tap into the things. I'm a clinical psychologist, and like the things that clients are saying to me are typically not in our measures, and we need some new scale developments. And like I said, move up the ladder the best you can. You know, there are some really great people out there. They're excited, like smart, reliable people that are happy to collaborate with us. Yeah, I want to thank you all for inviting me. I want to especially thank Brad Connor. He and I have done this work together. It wouldn't be possible without him and my many other colleagues and collaborators. I also want to thank Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment for funding that initial project that got us started on this path, and Cultivated Synergy and Seed and Smith for opening their doors to us. And then my student who made these slides look nice. Thank you.
So Mark, we have like a We have lunch set up outside for everyone, and then
Sure.
we invite everyone to come back in from like 1 to 2 to
Sure.
kind of just informally chat and pick your brains. So in the interest of time, I think maybe we can recommend that. And
That's fine.
Q&A then.
Yeah, no problem. Sorry with all the technical difficulties and I wasn't watching the clock, but I appreciate everyone being here today.